Good morning everyone and welcome to Health Horizons. Our series is designed to support leaders in your business by addressing the challenges and opportunities that are shaping the future of workplace health and wellbeing. It's part of our commitment to keep you updated on emerging trends, cutting-edge technologies and evolving practices in healthcare. We aim to anticipate challenges and opportunities that shape the future of workplace health and wellbeing, so you always feel one step ahead. Today we'll be discussing young people's mental health and the impact on the workforce. Almost 39% of parents, the equivalent to 7.6 million people, worry about their child's mental health at least once a week. There is a clear link between the mental health crisis of children and the worsening well-being of their caregivers. Moreover, the impacts felt at home can have a significant effect at work. As a parent myself, I can really relate to this topic, as I appreciate how much of an impact children's well-being has on your own personal well-being. Today we'll explore why organisations need to develop a strategy that not only supports the mental health of their employees but also their families. By acknowledging the issue and taking action as part of an inclusive wellbeing strategy, organisations can play an active and positive role in creating a better workplace for their employees. For today's session, I'm pleased to be joined by our four experts. Joining our panel is Dr. Rebecca Rohrer, Medical Director at Bupa. Morning.
Good morning.
Amy Eggington, Head of Proposition Development at Bupa UK Insurance. Morning. We have Farima Derbyshire, Director of Programmes at Mind Forward Allowance. Morning. Stumbled over that one, that was good. Okay, and Liz Hampson, Life Sciences and Health Innovation Partner at Deloitte. Morning.
Good to be here.
Right, we'll be with you all in a second. I'm just going to finish the intro. Please send us your questions throughout the session and we'll answer as many as we can get to a little bit later on. Today we're going to be covering three areas. Firstly, we'll explore what trends are on the rise when it comes to young people's mental health and how this impacts the well-being of their carers. Secondly, we'll delve into what societal shifts are amplifying young people's mental health and the challenges employers might face. And lastly, we'll discuss what businesses should prioritise to navigate this challenge to support talent, retention and productive workforces. Lots to get through, so let's get started. I'm going to first kick off with a discussion point on what people's mental health trends are on the rise. And I'm coming to you first, Rebecca. So from your perspective, have you observed a rise in young people's mental health trends in recent years?
Yeah, definitely, Richard. I mean, we know that about 18% of those aged 7 to 16 and 22% of those aged 17 to 22 have a probable mental health disorder. And that means that about 1 in 6 of young people might be struggling with their mental health. And we know that that's also on the rise. So there's been about a 50% increase in mental health disorders from 2019 to 2022 over the COVID pandemic, as well as other issues that we can explore in a bit. And we also know that we've got more young people having treatment for mental health disorders. So the number of children having treatment by the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service in 2022 went up by 53%. So we now have 1.2 million young people receiving treatment for mental health. So it's a big impact, and it's a big impact not just on those young people, but also on their families and on society as a whole. And I think, you know, when we talk about mental health disorders, it's really important to understand what we're talking about. And, you know, what we're addressing is depression, anxiety, but also issues like self-harm, suicidal ideation, and even issues like eating disorders. And we know that particularly eating disorders have really been on the rise. So there's currently about 1.25 million people estimated to have an eating disorder in the UK. It's the highest it's ever been. And that's really important because of the impact, again, as I said, you know, not just on the young people, but on their families. So we know that about 2/3 of parents in the UK are really concerned about mental health in their children. 87% of those are concerned not just about one issue, but multiple issues. And we know that that has a big impact for those parents. So 12% of parents who have a child with a mental health disorder are thinking about reducing their hours. 8% of those are thinking about quitting. So that really, I think, gives us an important, you know, an important call to arms in terms of us as parents, but also as businesses, to be able to do something about it and support people in the best way.
Absolutely, some scary stats in there. I know from my own experience, I've got 2 children and I'm very lucky that they're they're well, but as soon as they're off colour, it's impossible not to obsess about it, isn't it? Let alone if you're unlucky to be in that position, the impact on family life must be huge. So, Freema, I'm going to come to you next. So from your perspective, do you think the rise in young people's mental health has led to additional challenges in the workplace?
Really, very much so. I mean, it has a huge impact in the workplace and a huge impact on the parents and carers who are in the workplace, and businesses should be aware of it. There are actually two main ways, and the main way is, you know, as you have just said, if a parent's child is not well, it is very hard to focus on the job that is in front of you. Just from a mental point of view, our Mind Forward Alliance research showed that they were finding it harder to focus, harder to concentrate on what was in front of us, but also it's physical disruption. You don't get to control when appointments are. Your child might call you in the middle of the day and you will take that call. There's more requests for working from home. And, you know, you've just been mentioning about the Mind Forward Alliance stats that 12% considered reducing working hours or 8% leaving. It's a gender issue. The majority of those people that are thinking about reducing their hours and leaving the workplace are women, and there are women who are coming into senior management positions given their age. So it's actually also an equality issue in the workplace as well. And it's parents' mental health too. You know, 60% of parents who we talked to said that, and I think we can all identify with this, their mental health has taken a hit. And so they are not thriving in any part of their work. They're cutting their social life, they're not as productive, they care less about the next promotion, and they're low energy. So it is impacting the workplace, but I do think it's great we're having this conversation today, because I think the workplace can actually be a big part of the solution as well. Just the other way in which I think it's affecting the workplace, as you mentioned, stats are on people aged 17 to 22. These young people are coming into the workplace as well. So we're not just looking at the parents, and I know it's a conversation for another day, but there's a real focus on how can we help those young people who are coming in with the problems and challenges you just talked about. So big, and it's a hidden, the final point is it's a hidden workplace wellbeing issue, we think. From the focus groups that we've talked to, the parents are more likely to say, I have anxiety. There's a huge stigma around saying, I am supporting my child with anxiety, because they are worried they're going to be judged, or they're worried they won't be understood, or they're worried they're going to be blamed. So they're actually keeping more quiet about it. So it's a hidden. So this is bringing it into the light, which is great. So thank you. Sure.
A little start anyway. Amy, from your experience, how can young people's mental health impact your life, including your career path and mental and physical well-being?
Well, I feel like you two have basically just described me. So obviously, you know, I work at Bupa, and my child has neurodiversity, and he also has a mental health condition as well. I think there's two ways really. I mean, obviously, any parent struggles with anything wrong with their child or any sort of illness. It doesn't have to be a mental illness, it can be physical also. But I think sometimes it's the constant with a mental health condition. So obviously, you know, we all go through periods of strife if your child breaks the leg or something, and it's a real juggle. I think it's a mindset with a mental health condition that it's not a period of sort of chaos, it's a constant on. And I think for me, the struggle comes when the cog comes out of the wheel, if you like. So an unexpected life event might occur, or I might have to be, for example, away for 3 nights with work. And whilst that's stressful for any parent, regardless of whether they've got a child who's got a mental health condition, it just adds that extra layer of pressure. And I think that for myself, the onus becomes on me to then take on that extra pressure and think, okay, what do I need to do? What are the things that I need to do to put in place? Now, obviously, I'm super lucky to work for an employer that completely understands. We obviously work in this space, so, you know, it's what we do, if you like. But I think what's been really helpful for me is to understand how others cope. So I particularly enjoy the power of talking, the power of conversation, the community aspect of going through what other parents go through. And having a support system, for me, I think is probably one of the most important features to be able to kind of tackle just the everyday challenges that it can present.
Yeah, it's from what you both said, actually, it strikes me, and we often cover this in Health Horizons, it's all about creating the right environment at work, so people feel safe to open up, so you can then support them. And certainly I've had people in my team over time where it's all about just having the conversation and being flexible and, you know, enabling them to do what is actually most important in their life, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
So
yeah.
it's not really rocket science. But anyway, right, Liz, I'm coming to you next. So what factors do you believe are driving the rise in demand for young people's mental health support in the workplace?
Thank you. I think it's a great question, and I think we've talked a lot about the rise in incidence of probable mental health conditions in children and young people. One of the things that I do at Deloitte is I lead the Deloitte Health Equity Institute, and one of our key topics is around mental health. So we've partnered with charities on mental health for a number of years. At the moment, it's Place to Be is our major charity partner in London and in Birmingham. And every 2 years, we've published what's the case for investment in mental health in the workplace. And we've always focused on employees. This year, that was 51 billion, the cost, which is leaving your job, not working as productively as you can, and absence from the workplace. But this year, knowing the crisis that we have around children and young people's mental health, we added in the cost of working parents, and we asked parents in terms of, are they concerned about their children's mental health? Nearly half said yes, and half of them said that it impacts their performance at work in some way. And the ways that they identified was taking days off. It's more common for someone to take days off for their own mental health, as you mentioned, but actually 10% of parents take up to 5 days off to care for their children's mental health. Parents also having lower productivity, they're worrying about it, they may be taking shorter hours, they're not able to work at their best, understandably. And then many are actually thinking about changing their job, either to reduce their hours or to work closer to home. And our research found that 1 in 100 parents did so, change their job entirely due to their children and young people's mental health, which we thought was a shocking stat. But actually, when I've been talking about this for the last couple of months, I have lots of people saying, that's me, that's my family, and that's too low. And so I think that's really why we're seeing more demand for young people's support in the workplace. We also had some statistics about what parents who are worrying about their children are likely to do, which I can share a little bit later. But that was 8 billion worth of cost. So it's a massive cost actually to employers, and a cost that until recently I think wasn't talked about.
Yeah, that's a huge cost, and that 1 in 100, I agree, that does feel quite low. And I bet, back to your point, I bet the vast majority of that 1 in 100 is female as well. From the, it's definitely an issue in that space. And 8 billion, wow, that's eye-watering. I guess we focus a lot on helping people be the best they can possibly be at work, so they can, you know, really focus on their role. It's you know, a bit of a no-brainer that if you're worrying about your children, that's not going to happen. So it's such an important conversation. Right, we're going to move on to the next section, but first, I know you've all been waiting for this. We've got a poll. I love a poll. I love a poll. So, should be coming up on your screens. Do you think parents and caregivers need more support with young people's mental health in your organisation? Yes or no? We'll tell you the answer later. Well, so whatever you tell us. Okay, let's move on. So we're now moving on to talk about whether societal shifts are influencing young people's mental health and the challenges employers might face. So Rebecca, I'm going to come to you first. So from your perspective, how might societal changes be influencing the prevalence of young people's mental health in recent years?
I think it's important to understand this from the perspective that 3/4 of mental health disorders appear before the person reaches the age of 25. So this is an early problem. And when we're talking about the kind of prevalence of mental health disorders in young people, that for me indicates that it's never too early to create this open conversation and to kind of know what sources of help are out there. And there are a couple of factors behind that. So the first is age. We know that, you know, the adolescent brain is only just being understood, really. The prefrontal cortex, as anybody with a teenage child knows, is still developing, even well into the 20s. And that's the part of the brain that helps with prioritising and organising tasks and making good decisions. So that's part of it. I think there are other factors. So we know that drug use, particularly in the teenage years, can lead to some, or can increase the risk of developing some serious mental health disorders like schizophrenia. But there are societal shifts that we know have had a factor as well. You know, part of that is the modern world, the 24-hour news cycle, kind of this constant fear of, you know, things happening and, you know, just being acutely aware of all the things that are wrong with the world. But we also know that during the pandemic, when there were periods of significant social isolation for children, they were away from school, they were away from their support networks, that led to a big increase in health disorders as well. But also, you know, I think that was then followed by cost of living crisis, inflationary pressures that put families under pressure. And what we do know for young people is actually there are a number of protective factors, some of which is supporting the family. And if the family is under pressure, including, you know, pressure because of what they're experiencing at work and guilt because of what they're experiencing at work, then all of that starts to chip away at those support factors as well.
Yeah, that's 75% before 25. That's crazy. So I just want to clarify on that.
Yeah.
So is that an experience, but it might not present itself to after 25, or it's presented before 25?
So it can present itself afterwards, but there'll probably be, there may be some presentation of it before 25, but it may only unmask itself after that.
But triggered from something. Yeah, okay. That's really interesting. And slightly scary.
Yeah.
Okay. Amy, coming to you. So what emerging challenges in young people's mental health are anticipated in the future, and what should employers be mindful of?
Yeah. I think probably the biggest challenge isn't necessarily an emerging one, but probably a growing one, and that's around provision. So actually having enough provision to kind of, you know, first of all, diagnose and then help and treat that child and our young person. And that problem, as the stats that we've already talked about, you know, it's only growing every day. It's just escalating. So that provision challenge is always going to be there. I think there's a lot of, and I suppose as a consequence of that, that means then that there's more onus on a parent or a carer to take more responsibility themselves to step into that treatment role, if you like. So we always talk about, at Bupa, it's so important, isn't it? We talk about how it's really important to empower parents. And actually we're looking at a solution now whereby, you know, a child might go and have a therapy session for 1 hour a week, which is fabulous. But what happens for the other 6 days of the week? The parent or the carer has to somehow adopt the role of, I suppose, therapist in some sort of sense. So, you know, we're looking at ways that how we can actually train that parent or carer to actually equip them with the right tools, the right support system, networks to be able to help them cope and navigate those days off of treatment, if you like, which I think personally as a parent, that is something that would be incredible, and not something that's easy to find on your own. You know, I think you do need a lot of guidance and support in that area. And then just, I think, other things that are emerging is the importance of kind of helping others. So, you know, support systems, toolkits, communities, these are all things that actually really empower someone to take on the challenge, if you like. So, yeah, I mean, I think anything that can be done around filling the gap that will always exist, I think is something that's really needed and will continue to just grow in terms of importance.
If I could just chip in there, we talked to a number of focus groups, and I think that's exactly it. We talked to a parent who's like, you know, when my child goes to a therapy session, I need to be there. I want to be there for them, inside the room or outside the room, whatever's preferred. But then after that child has opened up so much, they then need parental support for some time after that. And then that parent then needs their own support because they've been dealing with the whole day. So this lady was saying it was like another job. You know, it was like so that is something that as we know that there's more. There's been a million in England in 2022, 2023 referred to children's young people's mental health services. So if every parent is helping children through, well, not a million aren't getting it, right? That's the other challenge, is that navigating the system itself takes a lot of time.
But helping parents to fill that gap is so empowering and important. And it's empowering for the individual parent as well, because you feel in control all of a sudden. There's nothing kind of more feeling, I suppose, you feel quite lost, I think.
I think it's
so having that control is really important as well.
100%.
Definitely.
It's know what to say as well as a parent.
Yeah,
like
the language to use.
If I get it wrong, or having that support rather than going to Google. So
well, I mean,
place to go.
I mean, I know we'll come on to solutions, but that is one thing that employees are asking when they're being told about how to support their own mental health, they're like, can you give me advice on how to talk to my child? Because they're not experts.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Right, Liz, I'm coming to you next. So how do you believe that workplace support for mental health of employees and their families needs to evolve in the future?
Well, one of the questions that we asked in our recent work was about their expectations of support. And I think we're all aware that people's expectations for their personal support have gone up. So 45% of people think that their employer should support them. But then on top of that, 35% of people think the employer should support them and their families. So this is things like employee assistance lines for their family members being able to use as well. So there is an increasing expectation about what the employer is providing around that support. And a third of people actually want more. And many identify that their employer doesn't really do very much. And so I think there's an increasing expectation for the role of an employer in here. And we also asked about what parents do if they're worried about their children and young people's mental health. And many go to schools or the universities, or they seek external support. But a third said that they were thinking about reducing the work hours. A quarter looked for PMI support. A quarter looked to their employer for additional support. And then others actually, as we said before, consider quitting their job. So these are all things that parents are thinking of doing that impact the employer or impact how the employer should be thinking about the benefit system that they offer. And I think that's a really important shift actually for employers to take into account.
Yeah, I think outside of just supporting the people that work for you, the business case, if you need a hard and fast business case, pretty obvious, isn't it? I think when you put it like that. Great. Okay, Farima, I'm coming back to you. So what emerging challenges in young people's mental health are anticipated in the future, and what should employers be mindful of?
Well, I think we've covered quite a lot of the challenges that are coming up. I think we've talked about this before, but we did a session earlier in the year with businesses around the impact of the perma-crisis. Us living in this perma-crisis environment of a pandemic, and then racist riots, and then, again, cost of living. And I think we are living in an incredibly unsettled world, and that is having an impact on parents. It is very much having an impact on young people. And as I said, when we held events, a lot of businesses will hold focus groups to let their employees talk about things that are challenging them, with anxiety around UK riots, anxiety around the pandemic, anxiety around Ukraine and Russia. Every time some people have come in and said, how can I talk to my children about this? Because they are incredibly anxious, because there's news everywhere. It's on TikTok. There are some, on social media sites, and social media and young people is a whole other event, so we'll not even go there, but of which I don't fully understand. But there are incredibly disturbing images on there. And so that, I think, is a quite big emerging issue. And I think we have a new government, and I know they're going to be doing more work about mental health, but I think it will continue to be a challenge. And we've already talked about this, navigating the system and then getting the treatment and then supporting the child through the system. So I think those are the the other thing I just wanted to mention that we're hearing in young employees, but also in schools and university, is this concept of unhealthy perfectionism, toxic perfectionism, this absolute fear of failure, to the point that, it's obviously great to strive to, we talk about wanting to strive to be excellent, but unhealthy perfectionism, like eating, like exercising, there's a point at which you burn out trying to be perfect. And there is an incredibly high incidence that in people in schools, universities, and the workplace at young people. So that's something that I know that businesses are dealing with.
Yeah, that's a real cultural point, that, isn't it, as well? And I know we're not talking about social media today, and we've talked about phones. We've talked about phones and children on a previous one of these, when we talk about addictive behaviour.
Right.
But actually, for lots of parents, I mean, I've got an 11-year-old, he's going to be 12 next year, and the choice of when to give him a phone and the damage that could do versus all his mates have got one, and that's a whole different area as well, I think.
Minefield.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so he's not getting one for now. It's news for you, Sam. You heard it here first. Actually, second, probably. Okay, cool. Right, we're going to move on. By the way, we're going to come to questions after this section, so please get your questions in. We've got a couple already, and we'll answer as many as we can. So in this section, we're now moving on to our final discussion point. What businesses should prioritise to support the mental health of their people and their families? So Rebecca, starting with you, how can businesses identify the signs that may mean someone is struggling at home with their mental health?
So as a doctor, by the time that I get to see it, it is the tip of the iceberg. There has been a huge amount of time and energy and pressure building up. So I think business has a huge role in identifying some of those early signs. Given what we've heard already, it can present in terms of not just increased absences, but also reduced performance, even, taking time off with illness, people reporting that they're not sleeping well. So there's a whole raft of ways that it can present in a very soft way. And you have to remember there's so much stigma around this issue that people can really overmask. So it can be very difficult for businesses and for even friends and family to understand what's going on. I think the challenge with that is it creates almost a cycle of guilt. People feel guilty that they're not doing enough at home and that they're not supporting the people that they love to be able to help them. And then they feel guilty about their performance at work, and it creates this awful cycle. And the risk of that, of course, is that it can lead to burnout. And burnout means emotional, physical, mental exhaustion, because they're so focused on caring for the person they're worried about that they're not caring for themselves. And we do know that actually you've got to look after yourself. It's the life jacket analogy in the airplane. You've got to put your own life jacket and your own oxygen mask on before you help anybody else. And that's particularly, I think, true of mental health. So creating a really honest, safe, open culture is absolutely the kind of baseline, I think. And then having the ability to raise concerns if you feel that people aren't their normal selves. Now, that might present as I mentioned, like people taking extra time off, people taking loads of personal calls, people having a change in their mood or how they're interacting with the colleagues, people being, shorter or sharper with people, reduced productivity, or even if they're looking tired and anxious over a long period of time, just check in with them. And there's no right language to do that. Even just saying, look, is everything okay? We've known each other for a long time. Do you want to go for a coffee? I think that's just a great start. There isn't really anything that you can say that will be damaging in that situation. It's just opening up the conversation. And then I think the second part of that is having a very clear signposting of resources, ways that you can directly help and ways that the organisation can help through, the PMI, for example, or other organisations, almost just having a list of those. Some organisations like mental health first aiders, that can be really helpful if you don't feel like you're in a position that you want to have those conversations. But I do think everybody being able to have a culture where they can talk openly about it is an amazing start.
Great, thank you. I do think one of the things for leaders is, across a range of subjects actually with their people, is a worry about saying something wrong in getting into the conversation. And actually it's much better to go in with the right intent and just go for it, and at least you're then having the conversation rather than just sitting in the corner and letting it run and run. So
I agree.
Something we can all do, definitely been there. Right, next, Amy, coming to you. So how do you think businesses can enhance support for young people's mental health and the associated challenges in the workplace?
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work. So I completely 1,000% agree with everything that Rebecca said. I think it really starts with open and honest conversations, really starting the conversation, encouraging people to open up and talk about these things, but not forgetting that that's not for everybody. And actually a degree of anonymity is really important for a lot of people. I personally have times when, I'm a talker, so I'm really happy I love the community aspect and I love to share experiences, but there are some things where you don't want to, that are very personal. And so it's important to have those support services in place as well. So things like the Family Mental Health Line, our Anytime Health Line, those are strangers, if you like, on the end of a phone that you can call up who won't judge, that you can have a very anonymous discussion with. I think online platforms are super helpful for that as well. So Jack, for example, very, very helpful for people who are even trying to identify a mental health condition in themselves, not necessarily even a loved one. wondering and curious about what it is to look out for, but not sure. So listening to other people's experiences can really help with that. So I think it's very much around, the support services, those resources to be able to help people, also coupled with lots of the kind of, managers encouraging, but I think a real skill in a manager is to spot a person and their need. So some people like myself will be very happy to have an open and honest conversation, and others not so much. But it's about being able to spot that, understand that, and still give them the right support by directing them to things like a helpline or a website or an anonymous community where they can still seek that help, but not necessarily in such an open way, which isn't comfortable for them. So I think recognising the difference is the real key to success.
Yeah, I'm being flexible in the approach.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Great. So, Farima, in your view, do you expect workplace culture and policies to evolve so they can better address the effects of young people's mental health in the workplace?
I mean, I think it should. I think it should evolve, and I think that businesses will increasingly see the need, and I think it is one of the next big frontiers in workplace wellbeing. So yes, I do. And I think, all the points that you made are really important. We find also that, they don't just want the PMI for themselves, they want the PMI for their families as well. That's a question that comes up a lot when people they first introduce their PMI. The other thing they're looking for is flexibility in how they work. There was a woman I talked to in a focus group, and her daughter had been cutting herself, and she was given the understanding that she could work from home whenever she needed to. Her daughter is well and recovered now, but she said, I actually was able to work at home. I think I would have left my job had I not been given that flexibility. So I think that the flexibility is important. And you talked about creating that sense of openness. And I think there's something about, and absolutely not everyone should share their story, but there's something about having awareness events around this and leaders talking about it. Once you do that, people are like, actually, yeah, I could do with that support. I will access that. I will. And they feel less shamed and more like do it. So I think there's a big cultural piece. And if they do that and create that safe space for conversation, I think everything will follow and it will become a virtuous circle.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's a leadership issue as well, to create the culture in which people feel safe.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the biggest thing in the toolbox is showing some vulnerability and sharing your own story, isn't it? And being really open about it, that helps others.
That's it, exactly.
Absolutely. Great. Okay, Liz, I'm coming back to you now. So in shaping a forward-thinking culture, how can businesses adapt and inform strategies to address the mental health challenges of their people and their families?
Yeah, so I agree with what Farima and Amy have said, and I think it is very much about setting the culture at the top and leadership and being open and making sure that it's known that mental health is a priority both for yourself but also for your family as well. And there is something about there isn't one size fits all. There is that diverse portfolio of support, and some of those need to be tailored to the needs of working parents. And I think businesses are in the exploration phase about what that looks like. I mean, I give an example at Deloitte. We're about to start a pilot with Place to Be, looking at a parenting support program for our employees. And I think that is a new area to think about. Employers have focused a lot in bringing people back from parental leave, but actually less once they are parents themselves. And there's been a lot of news in the news recently about the impact on working parents and the need to be around, particularly for teenagers, whereas the workplace focuses much more on younger children. And I think that is a growing issue. So I do agree with you. I think we will see more from employers, but we have to see how much they actually lean into that topic. They certainly should do a lot more, and I hope we have very positive results from our pilot ourselves. I think there's also something about monitoring and thinking about the different needs. Like, do you really understand the needs of your working parents? Do you really understand the stresses in your work environment, how that impacts on being the parent that you want to be? So I think that is actually listening and understanding the needs. And there will be different teams in different parts of the business that actually have different stresses around parenting. And I think becoming alive to that as a business is really important.
Just one thing that some businesses find really useful has been setting up peer support groups for parents because, you know, there's a lot of stigma, they feel very alone, and actually they get a lot of strength from being able to talk to other parents going through the same experience. But what that also provides is, and this comes to your point, the businesses can consult with these groups and find out, are we getting this right? What do you need? And so I think it is listening, and so that those groups had a dual purpose in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really obvious, isn't it, when you say that? When you walk into a business, you don't like forget your family, do you? Right. It's kind of, so if we want to look after our employees, we've got to look after all of them, not just the bit that happens to be at work at that time. I appreciate that. You know, there are lots of things that cost money, but there's a load you can do for free as well by creating the right environment, having the right conversations and so on. Cool. Right, a poll. Another poll. You're so lucky we got 2 today. Right, I will tell you where we got to in the first poll in a minute, but for our second poll, is your organisation taking steps to address the increase in demand for mental health support for employees and their families? Yes or no? Right, we'll come back to how those are performed in a little while. I've got some extra questions here. Exciting. Where should we go first? Liz, let's stick with you. So how confident are you that businesses are taking this matter seriously? And will you see change in the next few years? Or sorry, will we see change in the next few years?
I think, as I've said, businesses are becoming alive to the issue. I don't think that businesses were very aware of this issue a few years ago, but it also wasn't as much of an issue pre-pandemic as well. And I do see signs of change, actually, and I do think we're going to see the best employers are going to start putting in place support for their parents if they want to keep the best talent. As said before, often it falls on women when they're at a senior level as well. So it's a retention as well as a recruitment issue. When we do polls looking to see which employers you're attracted to, these types of issues come up. So I think if you want to be the best employer and attract the right talent, you're going to have to start paying attention more to this issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree with that. So, Rebecca, I'm going to come to you next. Do you feel that the current education curriculum and pressure around school has led to an increase in children's mental health?
I think the new kind of educational standards tend to be skewed towards a perfectionist approach to performance, for sure. I don't think it's the only factor. I think it has become very difficult with the wider cultural issues of social media, which we've discussed, the kind of 24-hour news tunnel. So I think it means that children don't have any release, right? They're at school all day, they've got expectations to perform, they're acutely aware of cost of living crisis, inflation, the need to get a good job and to, you know, that pressure's never going to let up. And then when they go home, they're also under pressure. So I think there is something that it's really important for caregivers to do to allow them to just be young people, to be able to have free play for younger children or not to be on smartphones for older children. And also to be able to be really honest about their own educational experiences. And actually the fact that, you know, if as a caregiver, you know, you've not been perfect at school either. Nobody has, right? And to be really honest and open about that. So not just important for businesses, particularly important at home, I think.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Right, I'm going to give you some poll results now and then I'm coming to you, Freeman, just so you're ready. Okay, the first poll, we asked, do you think parents and caregivers need more support with young people's mental health in your organisation? 89% of you said yes.
Wow.
Shock horror, that's a surprise. It's not a surprise. Okay, second poll. Is your organisation taking steps to address the increase in demand for mental health support for employees and their families? And 68% said yes, so feels like a good start, but more to do.
Yeah, good start.
Yeah. Right, coming to you. Gave you a warning. It's a really hard question, this. Really hard.
Okay.
I don't think it is. Okay, do you think that developing child and young adult mental resilience is a parental function, or should it be part of the educational process in schools and colleges?
I mean, okay, that is quite a hard. I mean, the word resilience is an interesting question in itself. Sorry, I'm just going to go down a bit of a wormhole there. So I think it's on all of society, frankly. I don't think it all falls on parents. I think it falls on schools as well. But then we need to define, what does resilience mean? And I think traditionally, resilience meant keep your head down and keep going, right? This is hard. Keep going. Are you about to break? Doesn't matter. Keep going. right? And so that was seen as being the most resilient, whereas what resilience maybe means now, and I think this comes to what you have just been talking about, is striving for excellence in whatever, or just being, but then knowing yourself when to take a step back, or knowing when you need help, and knowing when to reach up and put your hand up and say, I need support. And that is an incredibly difficult skill. Could everyone in this room say that we've got it? I'm not sure we could. And so it falls on all of society and role modelling to do that, parents, schools, and I think it's a big ask, but I do think it's a societal, and you know, it's a much bigger conversation. But I think it's that, and the children need help to do it. I don't know if that completely answers the question, but yeah, we all need to redefine what resilience is, and then everyone has a responsibility to do it, and that does just allowing them to be.
I think it's important to educate children as well, isn't it? Because often I think, you know, we think, you know, we've talked a lot about parents, haven't we, and employers, but actually I know from having a child who has a mental health condition and another child who doesn't, I understand the importance of educating her, because she has to interact and understand what's going on. So I think sometimes we often think that it starts at an adult level, whereas actually, you know, it can start from whenever they can understand, I think is really important. And I think bringing them up through the generations of understanding and having these conversations just be completely the norm is how that infects society, isn't it? That's how this really becomes completely societal norms to talk about the importance of well mental health. Is to actually teach children about mental health.
I think, and coming back, centering it in the workplace again, one question that parents have been asking around has been mental health training for them to be able to have, because they're worried about getting it wrong. We said that line managers are worried about getting it wrong with their direct reports. Parents are worried about getting it wrong. I mean, you're clearly very informed, but there may be ones who feel lost. So employees can help them have those conversations and give them the language and the confidence. Because what you don't want is for them to clam up at home and nothing move forward.
And there's so many resources available out there to help people have those conversations. And it's not just a one-off conversation, right? It's the beginning of a process. So it's not just one big scary conversation. It's starting it gently, learning what the mutual language of how you talk about mental health is together.
Yeah, no, I agree. And also the different channels of that, from just signposting to having a conversation, so important. And resilience a bit like confidence, isn't it? You should be confident. You know, we risk telling our children they should be resilient rather than actually helping them feel resilient and building the tools, you know, to get there. Right, we've got a couple of questions on neurodiversity, so I'm going to come to you first, Rebecca. Is there a link being shown between adolescent mental health and neurodiversity?
Yes, so we know that having a neurodiversity diagnosis or being neurodiverse, that there is a link to a higher incidence of some mental health conditions. But that's still an area of ongoing research. So it's not as clear as it should be. I think because historically the area of neurodiversity has been under-researched, to be honest. And there's been a lot of emphasis on mental health research. But what we do know is, you know, young people affected with the neurodiversity certainly can be at a higher risk of developing some mental health conditions. And it's really important, because they may have different communication needs, to get help earlier for those children, because actually the services may be more specialist. We know that, you know, particularly with current waiting lists, those can be really restricted. So seek help as early as possible.
Great, thank you very much. And so Amy, coming on from that, so how can employers support their employees through a neurodiversity diagnosis?
So I think importantly, the first tool is probably to recognise that that's a need amongst employees. So it depends how we look at this. We can look at it from the employee perspective. So a lot of people might assume that because a person's in the world of work and let's say they get PMI as part of their workplace scheme, that they are successful and doing really well. Well, actually, they could just be coping at work and not necessarily thriving. So I think there's a need there to support that individual for whatever they want that diagnosis to unlock for them potentially. And then obviously in the case of a PMI scheme where there's a dependent on the policy, you can argue that need is probably slightly more severe in the sense that they need to access a diagnosis to get through the education system or to get additional help within school or whatever that might translate as to that person. So I think there's two things. I think it's important that there's a recognition that there are two very diverse needs there, and that employers should probably consider what it is that they're trying to do. And another thing I think is ongoing support for that individual within the workplace as well is really important. So I personally, having been through this with my child, probably somewhat naively assumed, oh, you get a diagnosis, oh, that's not the end, you know, it's actually what happens then. And I get asked all the time, what treatment does your son have? Well, he doesn't have any treatment because it's how his brain works. But it's more about what support mechanisms are in place for him and for myself as well. So I think, you know, Bupa's been on this journey with our neurodiversity benefit. We've launched something that is absolutely needed in terms of getting that person that diagnosis. But now the journey continues around, well, what's the support now that surrounds that keeps that person well in work and really thriving? Or if it's the child, you know, making sure that they can unlock the necessary support that exists in society and in school. So it's a journey, I think, is important that we recognise that it's not just a one and done. It's one thing that we've got to continue to iterate and enhance and develop over time.
And different for everybody.
And different for everybody, exactly.
Great, thank you. Okay, Liz, coming back to you. So what should businesses prioritise? Helping parents prevent young people's mental health or providing support with dealing with young people's mental health?
So we look actually, every time we do that report, we look at what's the return on investment for employers' mental health support, and we get about £5 for every £1 back. This isn't as a well enough research topic. There is even less research on the investment returns for children and young people there is for employees. But what we see with that employee work is that you get much less if you wait until it's actually a presenting issue, as you said earlier. But if you invest in the beginning in prevention and education and cultural change, you get a much higher return. And I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be exactly the same here. So invest early. I think that parenting support, the parenting groups, the cultural awareness, etc., as well as ensuring when a parent has an issue, they have a support mechanism, you know, an employee support line, support through their private health insurance or other factors that can help around their work pattern. But actually that early investment is going to be the best return. Great.
Thank you very much. Right, coming to our last question now, then I'm going to ask you all for any final thoughts. So no pressure, you don't have to, but you know. Okay, Farima, coming to you. So how do you get the balance between letting them be children and educating them about mental health and the wider world?
So I think, I'm not sure there are two distinct paths actually. I think when you talk to a child, when a child's everyday experience should recognise that sometimes they're happy and sometimes they're sad and sometimes they're angry, and not to stigmatise or make it seem worse that if you get sad. I think I'm going down a bit of a wormhole here, but I don't think we should see it as this kind of when shall we have this conversation or this is a big conversation. Sometimes you will get sad. Sometimes I will get anxious. That's okay. That's just part of the, and name it from a really early age so that it just becomes, when you get to that point, you don't want to start having those first conversations about anxiety when they're 15, right? It needs to have been a normalised conversation. So I think it's a part of their childhood. Look, I'm not saying you name every single emotion as they go through their day. Like, yeah, exactly. You have to hold up a little flag saying how you, but it needs to be a normalised conversation so that you don't start having that conversation at 15, because starting any conversation at 15 any of them is hard. So normalise it. Yeah, that's what I thought.
By the way, I've forgotten the name of the films, but the two Pixar films.
Oh, yeah, Inside Out.
That's it, Inside Out.
I literally
amazing way into it.
It is.
Really good films too.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So, anyone got any final thoughts before we close the session?
I think my reflection is that just as it's important for you to be honest about your own mental health and to seek help, if you feel that things aren't right. It's just as important for you to teach your children how to do that and to be able to have those conversations, and for you to be able to sit around the dining table and say, I've just had a really rubbish day at work, or actually I'm worried about this, so that they feel that they can share that as well. And so it's about children being able to do that, parents being able to do that, and businesses being able to do that.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. Absolutely. I think, normalising the conversation is super important, and also recognising that some people aren't comfortable talking about these things, and that's okay too, and that's just as valuable. There are other means and mechanisms and places and websites that people can visit that they can get just as much support from without necessarily even needing to use their name if that's not what makes them comfortable. So I think my final thought would be around, it's not a one size fits all. It needs to be very tailored and personalised to each individual, and there isn't a right or wrong approach. So anything that I suppose a workplace can do to recognise that and provide those different avenues is only going to be more valuable.
Great, thank you.
My thought, just looking at it from the workplace lens, is clearly this is a huge societal issue and it's a huge challenge for the workplace. But I'm really excited about how big a role the workplace can play in the solution, actually, and we've talked about a lot of it, but from arming the parent with a language, taking the stigma away from it, giving them the PMI, giving them the flexibility. And it's good for the children, it's good for the parents, it's good for society. It will take pressure off the NHS, and it is so good for the business and their productivity. It's kind of win-win. So I do think it's a huge workplace wellbeing issue for the business, but it's also, they have an enormous opportunity to be a part of the solution, and it's really exciting.
Great, thank you.
I agree with that completely. I think it's very important for businesses to understand this if they're going to be responsible businesses. And those are the most successful businesses that understand the impact of life on their employees. So definitely something for good businesses to be thinking about more. Brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Great discussion.
Thank you.
It's been good. From my perspective, it seems pretty obvious that actually you've got to look after the whole employee, not just the work bit when they walk into the workplace. And if you're not sure about that, if you've got children, think about how much you would be concentrating on your work if you had some of those challenges in your life. For me, I definitely wouldn't be. So anyway, this brings our session to the close. Thank you very much for joining us today. Our next session will be on men's health in November, so we'll be in touch nearer the time. Remember also to check out our Academy for Practical Health and Wellbeing Tools to support your people. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time.